Hello, everyone. My name is Jesse Wieland. I'm the Associate Director at the Office of National Fellowships. We also have
Yeah, I'm Bonnie Garcia Glockner. I'm the Assistant Director for ONA.
and together we spearhead the Fulbright Fellowship on campus. It's one of our most well-known and popular fellowships that we work with undergraduate and graduate students on. We're really excited for all of you to be interested in this fellowship, hopefully joining us over the next few months to work on an application. But today we're going to be specifically talking about Fulbrights for creative arts students. So whether you're creative writers or musicians, painters, actors or actresses, these Fulbrights are often under-applied to when it comes to the grand scheme of things. Therefore, Fulbright very highly values students that are wanting to engage in the country of their choice through the arts. But moving on from here, if I could, briefly, a quick snag. There we go. So with today's presentation, we're going to be going over everything that the Fulbright application entails. It's one of the more dense applications that we work with, which is why we are speaking with you today in late January for something that isn't due until October. We're going to be going through both what you need to submit for Fulbright, but also how do you navigate our campus process. And so if you are wanting to apply through Florida State University, we have a different set of deadlines and procedures that you need to follow in order to receive campus endorsement, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. And we'll talk a little bit about our office. So at the Office of National Fellowships, we primarily work with undergraduates and alumni that are interested in applying for Fulbright, but we also partner with the Office of Graduate Fellowships and Awards, which works with master's or doctoral candidates. And both offices are housed within the Honors Scholars and Fellows House on campus if you are wanting to meet with us in person. And like I said, we'll have time for questions at the end. The only reason this slide is in here, I am not going to read all of it to you, but this is highlighting the history of the Fulbright Fellowship and why it was originally created. And I think that could be best summarized is that it was formed following World War II in order to foster mutual peace and understanding between the United States and these other nations that are part of the Fulbright program. And so that mission has and always will be at the forefront of what a Fulbright Fellowship should be, is how is your project, how is the work that you're doing, and in this case, through the arts, how is that mutually beneficial to both nations? So we want to, throughout your application, not just in your essays, make sure that that mission is evidently clear and as nuanced as possible. And so this is an award that is funded by the U.S. Department of State. A Fulbright is, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we're going through the website, it can just be so many different things that a lot of these pages for these different countries are often very vague. That's intentional. And so they want to see how, based on your experiences, your skills, your interests, why you are the perfect fit for this opportunity in the country that you are applying to. Moving on from there, quickly to touch on eligibility. You do need to be a U.S. citizen, and you do need to have your bachelor's degree by the time that the Fulbright grant starts. And so if you are watching this presentation, you are applying for the 2024-2025 Fulbright year. Our deadlines are going to be in fall of 2023, and that is for a program that is not going to begin until at the very earliest fall of 2024, and in some cases, February of 2025. So yes, you are applying to this award a few years in advance. And so we can start working with you as a rising senior, or if you are maybe finishing up the first year of your master's degree or you're wrapping up your doctoral coursework. Any of that is fine. Just talk to your advisor if you're a graduate student and you do have concerns. If you're an alumni, that's absolutely fine. We can still work with you, but just know that by the time that your grant begins, you need to have your bachelor's. When it comes to language requirements, there are many countries that have no language requirement. You just need to be proficient in English, and just as many countries, so maybe it's about a 50-50 split, where it's required that you have anywhere from beginner to intermediate to advanced proficiency in the host country language. We'll delve into that a little bit more later in the presentation, but that is something that you want to make sure that you take note of when you're considering possible destinations. And lastly, you do need to be in good health. It's listed here because the Fulbright wants to know and needs to know, in order to provide accommodations where it can, that you are capable of doing this project to the degree that you say you need to do it. And so for instance, where this has been an issue in the past is students haven't talked about medication that they need to take and that needs to be refrigerated, and they're applying to a region of the world where that accommodation may be harder to find, but if Fulbright knows about it ahead of time, they will do their best to work with you, provide additional funds if they can to make sure that isn't an issue, and so just please be specific when you detail that in your application. And so Fulbright does cover airfare to and from the country. They will pay for your cost of living in country. They'll cover your health insurance. They will provide you a living stipend. And so the way we usually frame that is you won't be in need, but you won't be living lavishly in country. So there is no, this is what a Fulbright is worth, because that is going to vary greatly depending on country, depending on award type. Fulbright operates in over 160 different countries, but again, a research fellowship, a creative art fellowship, an English teaching fellowship, all of those will vary to some degree from country to country. There are some common themes, but you want to make sure that you know all of the details of what does a creative arts Fulbright look like in Argentina versus Chile. So know all of those nuances, but oftentimes all of these awards are going to fall within that range, 8 to 12 months. So we usually just say a year or an academic year to be a little bit more accurate. And then when you're looking at, depending on your field of study, if you're applying for a creative art grant, you need to submit an additional portfolio that just your standard academic grant doesn't need to submit. And so on Fulbright's website, again, we'll pull that up later, you will be able to find, so for music, for example, I know there are very specific pieces that you need to have recordings of yourself performing in order to submit. If you're in theater, that you will need to have recordings of yourself, and I can't remember exactly in this moment the types of performances that they're looking for, but they just want to know what your skill level is. And the same goes if you're a painter. They'll give you, I think it's anywhere from like 8 to 10 pieces or something about that you need to submit to showcase your artwork. And I believe it's on the next slide. And this is just to kind of briefly highlight a student that I worked with a few years ago, and how she navigated this application process, and a little bit about the work that she submitted. But Christina worked with our office back in 2018, actually 2017, because this was a case, and it's why I partly enjoy talking about her stories, where she applied to Fulbright, I believe it was during her master's degree. And while she was listed as a semifinalist the first go around, she ultimately didn't receive it. And then she came back and worked with our office after finishing her master's degree. We made some edits and tweaks to her application. She applied again and was accepted the second time around. And the reason why I mention that is because for any student that we're working with, we know that Fulbright is extremely competitive. Christina's application that first time around was stellar. But it's no guarantee. So always have a backup plan, always have a contingency plan to make sure that your future is not just wholly contingent upon a Fulbright. Now, for Christina's project, so she grew up in the Midwest, and that experience heavily influenced both her art, her essays, her overall application, and why she wanted to apply to Germany specifically. Her art really highlighted what it was like to live in these rural areas, and to live in areas where there was a lot of rural decay, for lack of a better term. And so part of her project for her time in Germany, it was a large mural project that she was wanting to undertake in this small town, and it was the purpose of this project and some of the goals that she had for her future was providing in these small towns, in these small areas that were experiencing like rural flight. And so the population is either very young or very old, but wanting to create more of an art scene and more culture that might attract younger populations to these areas. It was also very unique in her application, and I am not saying that you need to do this to find success. I just think it's a very interesting caveat. But when she was planning her application, we're going to talk in a minute about what a letter of affiliation looks like. But she received a letter of affiliation from a local university that essentially said it was this faculty member was going to help Christina through this project. But she actually reached out to the mayor of the town in Germany that she wanted to do this project in, and got an affiliation letter from that mayor saying, hell yeah, like please come by. We would love to put this community project in order. Sounds great to me. You do not need to contact any political figures like in the countries that you're applying to, but I just thought that was a really interesting and in hindsight funny caveat to her application. But it proved that her project was feasible, which is a word I will probably say a few more times before this presentation is over. But before I get into the checklist of all of the application components that you need to submit, does anyone have any quick questions that I can answer? Okay, moving on. So the online application itself should be open, and if not, it should be opening very soon. But if you create an account in April, it opens. Okay, so it's not open yet. Very soon is relative in fellowship advising. Everything bleeds together.
You can make an account. You just can't access the application yet.
Okay, perfect. And the reason why we spend a little bit of time talking about this is because every year there's always a small handful of applicants that wait until the very end to complete the application itself. Their focus is on the essays because that does take a lot more time to really hone those essays. But the online application is a very deconstructed resume. It is going to take you a very long time to fill it out and to fill it out well. But there are, I believe, 3 or 4 short essays that you need to complete that, in the grand scheme of things may not seem that important, but I would argue are very important because it helps a review committee when they are reviewing anywhere from 50 to 70 applications. Those short essays help provide summaries of your project. So it helps them organize these applications as they're rummaging through them, but it also provides more depth to the application. So I usually wait until about the final 3 to 4 weeks before we submit everything to start working with my students on those short essays, because oftentimes in the statement of grant purpose and in the personal statement, there may be information either regarding cultural engagement or aspects of their project that maybe they don't have space to fully delve into in the essays. And then we can siphon some of that information off and use it in the online application again. So your application holistically is providing an extremely nuanced look as to what your project entails. So anyways, create the account. Maybe you can go in and see those items, or at least at the very least be able to access all of it in April. And then this is something that we have the prompts for. These are on the website. So you do not need to wait until April to start getting some preliminary stuff written, but the main component that you will be working with your advisor on is this statement of grant purpose, and then eventually this personal statement. So you have 2 pages single space for the statement of grant purpose, 1 page single space for the personal statement, and that does not include your heading. So you actually have a little bit less space. Now, what I would recommend is going onto the website and obviously, reading the prompt for these essays. But once you read them, I would not hyperfixate on each individual item, because what you will find, at least for the statement of grant purpose, is what they are asking you to include. If you include literally every item, you are going to find that your essay is extremely choppy. It's not going to flow very well. And the same goes for the personal statement. I have seen students that have taken these prompts, addressed them very literally, and it just comes across stale. And so what they are looking for in the statement of grant purpose, first and foremost, is why are you applying to this country? And so usually I recommend to my students to begin their essays with some sort of assertion, either rooted in current events or data, personal anecdote, again, whatever that may be, that roots yourself and your narrative in this country. And then we can transition into the details of the project itself. What does the timeline of this project look like? What are you creating, or what communities are you engaging with? And give us as much detail, probably for another full page, about what that project will be. And then towards the end of the essay, that's where you can start including secondary or tertiary elements of the project, other cultural engagement ideas that you have, other things that are relevant to the success of this project. And then your personal statement will provide distinct, but complementary information that will ultimately support the mission of your project. For example, Christina's application that I mentioned earlier, her statement of grant purpose, it dove into the history of this town and area that she was wanting to engage with. That rural flight that I mentioned, it spoke to what this community was experiencing. She got into the details of her mural project and how it was going to engage the community and what her overall goals were for that project. And then her personal statement dove into the farm that she grew up on in Kansas, and in some of these sites and areas that were very inspirational when she was even before she was a formal artist, but served as inspirations for her work. And then with this personal statement, I usually tell students that you don't have that full page to share a story about yourself. You maybe have about half a page, maybe 3/4 at best, but you do need to, at some point in that essay, connect your narrative back to why Fulbright. Why should I, as a reader, care about the story that you shared relative to this award? And so students will sometimes find ways to show the direction that they're hoping to continue in after their time with Fulbright concludes, or again, other areas or of cultural engagement that may be relevant to the story that you're sharing. And so throughout most of the summer, whether you're working with myself, Bonnie, or our colleague Keith, who couldn't be here today, that's the majority of what we're going to be meeting to discuss on a weekly basis are these two essays. Now, this language evaluation, like I said, it can range from beginner to intermediate to advanced, dependent on the country that you're applying to. For example, if you're applying to any Spanish-speaking country that is going to require anywhere from intermediate to advanced proficiency, most Francophone countries are going to require some proficiency in French. But regardless, say if my project is going to be in Peru, and again, requires intermediate proficiency. But say the nature of my project, say I'm doing a poetry project, and I'm interviewing and I'm engaging with the local population, and these are interviews that I need to translate, or maybe if I need to code those for just my recording purposes, and all of that before I even begin writing my poetry. And what I'm saying all of this because if the nature of my project really necessitates advanced proficiency, and I can only show that I have intermediate, and I can't show that I have someone or an academic in country that's willing to help me with these translations, that will hinder the feasibility. That word comes up again. It will hinder the feasibility of your project, and therefore it may hurt your chances of being selected. So know what your project entails, know the proficiency that you need or where you can find that support, and make sure that we either show how you're going to continue to develop your proficiency in the year before your project begins, or how you'll be supported in country. These letters of recommendation, you do need 3. ideally, I mean, as an artist, you want artists and faculty that have either seen you as an undergraduate, as a graduate student, create and develop or maybe through shows that you have put on or curated. They want to see how you have engaged with your own art, with the art scene, or in any way that's relevant to what you are undertaking with a Fulbright. So ideally for any academic grant, we want to see at least 2 of those letters come from academics, ideally all 3. But if only 2, maybe that 3rd letter could be in a really good character reference. Talk about your leadership, talk about your ability to engage across culture. We have had students that have had close relationships with their language evaluator who has seen them, again, this is dependent on your project, that have provided a letter for their language evaluation and then a letter for a letter of recommendation to speak to their willingness to learn and engage with this community and to grow their language proficiency. So long story short, is make sure that they are speaking to your academic, your personal qualities that are going to serve you well in this Fulbright. The letter of affiliation, you need 1 for any academic grant. It requires at least 1. And 9 times out of 10, that is going to come from an academic institution. And so what faculty or professor in this country or in this university near where I am going to be, how are they going to support me and ensure that this project gets done and gets done on time? But additional affiliation letters can be extremely helpful, not always. And so don't feel like 3 is better. A quick story of where a student who was doing a creative project, it was a film project, I think did do this extremely well. So they were applying for a film project in Germany, and it was to document the construction of this living space that was going to provide on the ground floor, was going to provide space, affordable space for artists to use to just create. But it was also going to provide affordable housing for people from lower SES backgrounds, recent immigrants and other communities that are having trouble finding housing in, I can't remember the city in Germany that it was in, but it was a larger city. So anyways, this project was going to film the creation of this space. It was going to engage with the people that were going to be moving into this space and the overall impact, positive impact the community hoped that this would have in their area. And so he obtained the letter of affiliation from the nearby university. It was a faculty member that was willing to work with him, ensure that his project was ethically sound, it was positively engaging with this community, but then took the initiative to reach out to the company that was in charge of the construction of this project. And they were very excited that he wanted to join. And we're like, absolutely, let us know what you need. We'd be happy to have you. But then also got a letter of affiliation from a nonprofit organization that was also affiliated with this project, just not in the construction of the space itself. And so in his application, after detailing everything that he was going to do, he had 3 very strong affiliations from heavy hitters when it came to this project itself. And so as a reviewer, that is going to assuage many of the fears that I might have, or concerns, I should say, that I may have about this applicant's ability to do this project. So anyways, to reiterate, that is why we are talking to you now in January. We understand there are many, many months between now and the deadline. However, you should be taking advantage of this spring semester. And I myself, and I'm sure Bonnie has as well, are already meeting with students who aren't writing. They have a general idea for maybe where they want to go or what they want to do, but they are reaching out to universities. They are reaching out to their faculty here at Florida State to see what connections they may have or recommendations they may have. And they are sending these emails out now. So hopefully by the time that the summer starts, I hope you are not applying to, and I always use this example because it always happens every year, but we have students that are applying to France, and you should, it would be a wonderful opportunity, but that country takes their holiday very seriously and they will not respond during the summer. I wish the United States operated in a similar manner, but they will not respond to your email until maybe the fall, hopefully before Fulbright is due. And so if you're not reaching out early to establish these connections, it's gonna make the application process a lot more stressful for both you and myself, and I want us to avoid that as best we can. The supplementary materials, again, it is dependent on your field. You can find on the website exactly what you need to submit. And so if you already have that developed, excellent, just maybe curate what would be the best pieces that represent what you are wanting to create or do in country. And if not, if there's something that you're missing, if you look now, you still have plenty of time to prepare. If you're a musician and there's a specific piece that you need to practice, then you still have many, many months in order to do that. Transcripts from every institution that you've attended, they only need to be official, if I'm pretty positive I'm correct in saying this, if you are awarded the fellowship. You don't spend the money on the transcript for our campus deadline. You do not need to, and I'm pretty sure you don't need to for the national deadline. So anyways, just make sure that whatever transcript you submit has every course that you've taken and from every institution that you've attended. And make sure that you do not forget about your passport. If you don't have one already, you can go and get one or apply for one through international programs at Florida State over in Joe Campbell Stadium. And they're usually a bit better at getting you that passport a little bit more quickly. And at least from my experience, I believe it was a little bit cheaper than if I had just done it on my own. So I know that was a lot of information. So again, feel free, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat. But we're just going to talk a little bit about what you can do to help make your application stand out, not just for FSU's review process, but for the national review process and ultimately, hopefully, the international review process. And we'll go through those steps a little bit later. But I'm going to get another drink of water quickly. So if you do have a question about any of those components for Fulbright, please ask. Okay. So, like I said at the very beginning of this presentation, a commitment to Fulbright's mission, first and foremost, needs to be very clear in every aspect of your application. How is this project mutually beneficial to the community that you're entering, to the country that you will be in, and also what are you taking away from this experience and how is that going to be impactful to your long-term career back in the States? Rarely is this second bullet point an issue when it comes to in-country experience. Where it does become an issue is, say you are currently residing in Portugal, and then you are applying to the cycle to hopefully extend your stay in Portugal. That's not what Fulbright wants to support. They want to provide new cultural experiences for many students. Now, if there is a country or culture that you know intimately, maybe you grew up there as a kid, or maybe you have traveled there many times, maybe you've been there as a college student or as a graduate student, that is okay. It's just they do not want to see just continue like 6 or 8 months or more in length prior to the start of your award. They want to make sure that there is some distinction, some separation there. The language proficiency plans to approve. I've already kind of beat that dead horse. Just make sure relative to your project, you have the skill set that you need, or you know where to find that support. If in your application, in your essays, if I can just Control F and find every place where you use the country's name, every place you say France, and if I can replace that with Italy and it is the same application, it is not a competitive application. You need to, in as many ways as possible, highlight why this project needs to be in this country, in this city, at this university. Again, however you define that, but make it as specific as possible. And feasibility, again, is the one word to take away from this presentation. You have, in some cases, 8 months to complete this Fulbright project. So if you're submitting a proposal like Christina did for a mural project, that is going to take many hours and days and months of your time to complete. And so you want to make sure both based on your resume, based on your ideas, based on the support that you have, based on everything in your application, a reviewer seeing this application for the first time will think, yep, that makes sense to me. I think they can do that in the 8 or 10 months that they have. Now, in some cases, dependent again on your field and the work that you're creating, if my Fulbright is all about gathering information, I need to, whether those are interviews or whether you're ultimately creating a chat book or you're writing, again, if you can show me that this Fulbright is all about getting the information I need, the insight that I need to ultimately create this grand project long term, we can talk about that, but for right now, just focus on how your project can be completed in the time that you have in country. You obviously, when it comes to your supplemental materials, you want to, these applications will be likely reviewed by artists, or at least people that have knowledge of the region or area that you're applying to. Is you want to make sure that if you have everything good to go, by all means, feel free to submit that. But if I need to maybe practice and maybe provide a better recording of myself, or maybe there's a piece that I can create between now and October that maybe I've been planning for a little while, or I've already started. By all means, you don't need to have your supplementary materials done until late August at the very earliest, but in some cases we're willing to, and I'll get into that timeline a little bit. But in some cases, we're willing to let you submit them a little bit later, closer to the deadline. But I'll talk about that in a minute. This last little bit, we want your essays to have art. We want them to be authentic. We want them to be relevant. And we want them to be compelling. Now, okay, so for our deadline, like I said, you're applying to a Fulbright a full year in advance of when this would actually start. The very first serious deadline that you have will be June 1st of this year. And so that is for what we call our project proposals. And essentially, that is first full drafts of your statement of grant purpose and of your personal statement. They do not need to be finely edited and perfectly curated. That's the point of why you're working with myself or Bonnie or Keith. But we need to know that what your project is, where it is going to be, and what is the scale and scope of that project. And so now all the time that you have between today, January 25th, I think, and June 1st, you need to be planning. You need to be reaching out to these institutes in the country that you're applying to. You need to be sitting down with your faculty and your advisors and your mentors. You need to be understanding when is the best time for me to apply to Fulbright, where is the best place, and who are the best support systems. So by the time we get to June 1st, from June 1st until August 23rd, it is just a mad dash to get this application completed. Hopefully, it's less mad because you have prepared yourself well, but it is going to be weekly or bi-weekly meetings to sit and go over your statements and help you manage all of these pieces that you need to get. And so for all intents and purposes, this August 23rd deadline, and this is an educated guesstimate of when we are going to have this deadline. At the very worst, it may be a couple days later or a couple days earlier, but for right now, know that the end of August is when my deadline for a full and complete application is, because this is your deadline. This is our deadline. This is my deadline, Bonnie's deadline, our office's deadline, that early October deadline, because you are going to submit your application, ideally with your portfolio complete, by August 23rd, because we then, and when I say we, this is all Bonnie, will coordinate with far too many faculty members at Florida State that come from all different academic disciplines. There will be artists, there will be social scientists, there will be people with STEM backgrounds who are going to sit and review your materials. And you will have a 20-minute interview with about 5 or so minutes for questions, where they are going to and these kind of operate on a spectrum. It kind of depends who's on your faculty. I've seen these where these are pretty rigorous interviews. They ask you very challenging questions about your project, about its feasibility, about where you're going, about your knowledge of the country, about your knowledge of current events in that country. And I've seen these where it is a 20-minute, very pleasant conversation. And these are usually for the students who have done their homework and have spent a lot of time and effort, and their application is done. of where these are some areas where we can tweak and improve your application, best of luck. But the goal of these interviews, it's multifaceted. The first is that you get feedback from committee members, faculty, like you get their perspective. So you get another set of eyes on your application. The other way in which they are beneficial is that you will get a CCE form, that stands for a Campus Committee Evaluation form, from one of those faculty members where they are answering about 5 questions, I believe. You can find this online, or we can share it with you if you reach out to us, where when that CCE form is done well, it adds so much depth to your application about your character, about your passions, that maybe you don't get to delve into fully in your essays or in your application elsewhere. But I have read CCE forms that have nearly brought me to tears from students that I've worked with for many years, and that I've seen CCE forms where it's like, well, we'll attach it. But that usually comes from a lack of preparation. Anyways, we want to make sure that you are well prepared and that your application is prepared to be reviewed. So anyways, you go through your interview, you get anywhere from like 1 to 2 weeks to implement the feedback that this committee gives you, and then you submit your application by late September. And that is because Bonnie needs to attach up to anywhere from like 40 to 70, depending on how many students we have this year, CCE forms to all of these applications. And we need to go through, and for our individual students, read through these applications, make sure that all I's are dotted and T's are crossed and everything is good to go, so we can submit before this early October deadline. And so, yes, we do have the ability to unsubmit your application up until about 5 days prior to this deadline. So after those 5 days, there's nothing we can do to help you if there is an error. So again, I know I'm beating a dead horse, but we want to make sure your application is A-OK well before this national deadline. Now, after everything is said and done by early October, that's when your application moves past the FSU screening committee and moves on to the national screening committee. And so those are held in New York City and Houston and Washington, DC. And these are faculty members, usually, from many different universities across the United States who have either specific expertise in the country that you have applied to or in the region that you've applied to. They have very intimate knowledge about the language, or they have very intimate knowledge about the feasibility of your type of work. They may be academics in your field and how that project you're proposing will be received in country. So long-winded way of saying, you can't bullshit these committees. You need to be prepared, and they will determine whether your application is then moving on from the National Review Committee to the host country. And so those decisions, we are literally twiddling our thumbs as of today, waiting for these decisions to come out. And so it's late January where you will find out if you are a non-select, please apply again next year, or if you are a semifinalist. And so if you are a semifinalist, that's where your application moves on to the host country for final review. And it won't be until likely April before we hear whether you are a non-select, please apply again next year, an alternate, or whether you received the fellowship. I should also say that when you find out that semifinalist status, that notification will either say, congratulations, you will hear from us soon, not even soon, you will hear from us, or it'll say, congratulations, here is your interview time for your host country. They are not flexible on what that time is. We have had students that have interviewed at 3 in the morning for the country they applied to in Eastern Europe. And so, you want, and we can help you prepare for that. But you can usually tell online, or at least myself or Bonnie will be able to let you know which countries typically hold interviews and which do not. But regardless, by roughly April, you'll find out if you've received the fellowship, and then that will, from there, we will figure out what you need to do in terms of, sometimes they have orientations in country before you go, to prepare yourself for this opportunity to begin usually like in August or September of 2024. After that, so how can our offices help? Obviously, we are a great sounding board for the projects that you are wanting to undertake, and how that will be received in country, but my background is not in art. And so want to make sure that you are sitting down with us to review your applications, with your advisors and your mentors to review your specific project. We'll help you manage all of these pieces. We'll talk to you about who might be the best recommendation letter writers. We also coordinate with them for these letters to make sure they are all submitted on time. We will also host writing workshops throughout the summer and early fall. And in many cases, we will let you bounce between one advisor to another just to get another set of eyes on your application. And then we are here if you have any specific questions about the fellowship, or we have contacts within Fulbright that we could refer you to if you have questions that we cannot answer. And I think the slide after this is just contact information. And so if you do need to head out, thank you so much for attending, but feel free to reach out to us. And so these at the top, Adrian, Keith, and Honorine are with OGFA. And so if you're a master's or doctoral level candidate, that's who you'll be reaching out to. Myself and Bonnie and Dr. Filer and Christine, we work on the undergraduate side of things. So if you're an undergraduate or you're an alumnus, please reach out to us. And we would love to schedule a meeting with you in the coming weeks to just talk about your ideas and talk about the feasibility of a Fulbright and when would be the best time for you to apply. So please feel free to reach out to us. And now we have time for questions, but also if you would like to hang out, I'd be happy to bring up the website as well and go through that. Any comments, questions, or concerns? Okay. And so I assume that if you are hanging out, it is because you cannot wait to see the website. Okay. Okay. Okay, so oh, okay, cool. Let me see. Melissa, yes. So we will share the recording. We're going to send it out to everyone who registered. So if you do need to head out, you will get. I'm happy to go through this part of the presentation and share that with you later. But yeah, we'll get that to you. And so I know this seems obvious, but when you are researching your Fulbright, please make sure that you are on the U.S. student program. Every year we get maybe 1 or 2 students that accidentally creates an account for the faculty level Fulbrights. That is not what you are applying to. You are applying to the U.S. student program. After you receive your doctoral degree, that is when you could opt into and qualify for one of these faculty awards later on. But when I'm working with students who at this early juncture, they usually fall into 2 camps. The first being, I know exactly the country that I need to apply to. My project is flexible. I don't know exactly what I want to do, but I know it has to be here. Or this is exactly what my project is, or the research, or the whatever that may be. But it could be adapted to one of 2 or 3 different countries, depending on how I spin it. And so there's no, whichever camp you fall into, one is not better than the other, but just use that to help you search through the different options that you have. And so Again, this may seem a little bit obvious, but I think starting with the countries itself, usually most students have a general idea for the region. Like, for example, sometimes like a student will come highly qualified for Fulbright, but has no other foreign language proficiency. Obviously, that limits you to a degree, but you have so many different options. And the one country that I usually always bring up first, just because I think it's a good summation, is Brazil, because this is what you'll most likely see when you click on that country. These awards are usually grouped into either ETAs, those English teaching assistantships, or an open study / research award. So if you're applying for a creative art fellowship, you are almost always listed or lumped under that open study research award. And so all of these awards are going to have different levels of specificity. When you're scrolling through these different sites, some are extremely vague, like I said earlier, and some are very specific. And so you want to make sure that you scroll through all of these different caveats. Like, for example, Brazil is one of those rare opportunities that doesn't start until February, meaning if you're applying for this cycle, you wouldn't start until February of 2025. So know that timeline. Also, the 9 months, again, when it comes to feasibility of project, is very important to know how much time that you have. They will often tell you in this candidate profile, what they're looking for, maybe what fields of study they prioritize, what types of fields maybe are prohibited, unfortunately, from applying to this country. But again, most are pretty broad. Like, this will tell you that proficiency in Portuguese is considered somewhat important in the selection process, but it doesn't sound like it is a deal breaker. It's also important to note that most countries do not allow dual citizens to apply, but I think in recent years, we've seen more countries that do allow that. So be aware of that. And the foreign language proficiency, important to know that it is intermediate. Now, I also bring this up because for academic grants, for creative art grants, it's very important to know this right here will tell you, so open study research projects are allowed in Brazil, but if you're pursuing a graduate degree, that is not allowed. Sometimes you will see the inverse of that. And if it's the inverse, then unfortunately, unless you're applying for an MFA program, or a graduate degree like in the arts, you won't be able to apply. But some countries also do have yes for both of these, meaning any and all projects are welcome, whether you're associated with a graduate degree or not. It's just important to know, is your project literally allowed in this country or not? Now, I also bring up this because so it's important to know if you are applying to this country that if you are applying to Sao Paulo, Salvador, or Rio de Janeiro, your project will be at a competitive disadvantage. And that's Brazil's prerogative. They want to send Fulbrighters to areas of the country that aren't engaged with as frequently. However, with that caveat, I worked with a student prior to the pandemic, I think this was back in 2018, who was applying to a creative art project in Brazil, poetry specifically. And we, in our very early meetings, spoke to, well, we know that your project, which it needed to be in Sao Paulo, we know that it's going to be at a competitive disadvantage, but based on conversations with the student, the populations that they wanted to engage with and needed to engage with for their project primarily existed in Sao Paulo. The museums and culture that they would have access to is in Sao Paulo. The academic that they wanted to work with at the university, that's where they were. And so it's like, so we in their application cited very specific numbers and data and resources, and basically said my project would be hindered. It would not be to the quality that I can create if it is not in this city. And they were ultimately awarded the Fulbright, but so know what you need to do in your application as you are approaching these different countries. And I think that will determine whether your application is successful or not. And so anyways, that's just kind of the brief tour of one country and how to find all of the details for that page. Now, there are plenty of other resources on Fulbright's website, from YouTube presentations to other like Slack channels and other opportunities that you can find on your own time. But what I also want to highlight is under the alumni page, they do have these alumni ambassadors that go all the way back to 2008. And so these are alumni of the program that have agreed to, like, if you're interested in Fulbright, if you want to learn more about this opportunity, please reach out to me. And so what you can find is that under this more info, it has their contact information, where they went to school, when they did their Fulbright, a brief bio about them, and then some of these, I believe Gavin has this at the bottom, has very specific identities that if you are a part of this group or identify in this way and you want to better understand what it was like for me in this country and what my experience, please reach out. And so use this resource once you've determined the nature of your project or you've determined where you're applying to. I think Fulbright, perhaps more so than most fellowships, it really is a community that wants you to succeed. They want you to put together an application that you're proud of and hopefully receive that opportunity. And so I and Bonnie and ONF and AGVA have years worth of alumni that we would be happy to refer you to, but in some cases, you just don't. We don't have someone who maybe went to the country that you were applying to, or maybe who did a creative art project, and that's where this could be a really excellent resource. And if you don't find anyone who would be relevant to speak to for what you're wanting to do, you can also utilize this grantee directory, where you can search by field, by country, by institution, and find someone, hopefully, that over the years that Fulbright has existed, did something that you're wanting to do in country. And a good example of this was some years ago, I had a student that was applying to Vietnam for a public health project, and we couldn't find the resources that were relevant. She was reaching out to hospitals in the area. She was reaching out to other nonprofits and wasn't hearing back, was sending reminder emails. And so we went to the grantee directory and found, I think it was about 5 years prior, someone had done a public health project in the area in central, I think it was central Vietnam, where she was wanting to go. And she reached out to them. She found them online and essentially was just like, hey, I'm sorry if this is weird. I saw that you did a Fulbright in this area in public health. I've been trying to reach out. Do you have any recommendations? And I've never had an instance where students reaching out in that way were met with, like, I'm sorry, can't help you, find someone else. Every time those alumni have shared their essay, shared their contacts, have offered to reach out on their own to serve as a liaison for that student. And so, again, thinking about this spring semester, please be talking to your advisors, your mentors, and be reaching out to Fulbright alumni. So by the time that we get to that first deadline in June, you have a very mature idea of what your project is or can be and why it needs to be in the place that you're applying to. And you have not just your advisor at ONF or AGVA, but you have all of these other resources at your disposal to help you in navigating that project. And now, unfortunately, I do need to wrap up because this classroom is reserved 5 minutes from now. But if you do have a question, please feel free. I have a couple more minutes, or feel free to email us. And we look forward to working with you.